Welcome back to lesson number 8 here in Resolve inside the color page. So today we are going to do a few more exercises and learn a few more advanced things, right? So we're once again in part 3 of our book. Last time we learned a lot about groups. This time we're going to learn a few other things that are going to be essential for us as colorists and editors to know in the post-production workflow. Perfect. So now the first thing we're going to start here is to understand resolutions, and also we are going to learn today more about the sizing. If you remember from a previous episode, we have talked about this when we talked about the specifically over here onto our reference sizing, okay? We've only done that, but today we are going to explore each feature, okay? What we could do with the sizing. Now, this lesson is what you would call also a bit of what the colorist does in the process of finishing, okay? Which is also very important to reframe things, to, make sure that the vision is correctly, okay? Output it into our image, making sure that really we're getting things the way that the director and DP intended it to be. Okay, so that is also very important. So let's get started and let's start talking about a few of the things that we need to know inside of Resolve. All right, so the first thing we're going to do here is we are going to go into our project number 5. Okay, which is going to be this one of this man into this office over here. Okay, perfect, as you can see. Now, as you remember from the previous lesson, over here, you can see that we have all the clips available to us, and that is because here on clips, we have selected all clips. Once again, remember that you can also really filter things and clips the way you want to, whether that's by flags, whether that's by groups. Okay, so that's all available to you over here. Perfect. Now, with that said, we are going to, first of all right, so you can see that we have just a note here. Just for the sake of it, we are going to create another one over here, and we are going to name this to vignette. Just like that, okay? So this is our vignette, and we can quickly create a vignette around this clip over here. Now, I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger so you could see a little better to something like that, okay? And we are, as I said, going to create a vignette. So we are going to go here on our window. If you don't remember what I'm talking about right here, all this stuff, you can go back to lesson number 3, which we talked about all of that, okay? So now we are going to click over here. You can see that we have a circular window, all right? And now I do have my mini panel over here, but just for the sake of this tutorial, I am going to show it to you with the mouse, but I don't really use the mouse to do this. So we're going to go to something like this, okay? Around our subject. Maybe we can make it a little bit smaller, something like that. All right, there we go. And then we are going to remember this to invert it, okay? Because we don't want to affect what's inside. We want to affect everything that is outside of it. So here on the gain, we can also lower a little bit. So that creates a bit of that vignette. And what we could do is also, we are also going to add a little bit of a bluer, okay? Make it a little bit colder on the edge. So you could see that if I do before and after, you can see that we added this sort of feel, okay, to the outside edge of our clip over here. So perfect. Now that we've done all of that, we are going to learn something a bit more specific, okay? So what are we going to learn? We're going to learn how, if we do add something like a secondary, okay, effect, whether that's skiing, whether that's like a vignette, all right? So how's that going to affect our image, okay? So how's that really going to affect our image if we do change the resolution? Is it going to be smaller, the window? Is it going to be bigger? What is that going to happen to it? Okay, so that's where we are focused on. So I'm gonna make this a bit smaller to something like that, okay? Perfect. All right, now in case you want to hide it, once again, you can always go back here on off. You can see that we can hide our window, okay, to something like that. But in this case, I'm going to keep it on because I am going to show you something, okay? Now, with that done, we are going to change our resolution. So what we need to do, there is a few different ways you could do this, but the easiest one is to come down here. You can see that we have our project settings. I'm going to click that. And we have a few different options, okay? It's good to know what each of them does, okay? That is something that you can also go in one by one and understand what they do. But in this case, we're going to stay here on our master settings, okay? Just like that. And what we're going to do, here on timeline resolution, you can see that we are currently on an HD, okay? Timeline, 1920 by 1080, pretty standard, all right? This is a 16 by 9. And on timeline resolution here, we have a few different presets or options that we could choose, as you could see over here. So now the one, you also have the custom, so you can create your own custom. if you wanted to make a different sort of aspect ratio, something that is unique to what you want, and just do your custom one as well. So in this case, we're going to choose one of the presets, and the one we're going to choose over here is going to be the 3840 by 2160, which is Ultra HD, of course. So now once I click that, all right, once I select this resolution, all right, we're not changing anything else, frames per second or anything else. We're going to keep it the way it is, just the timeline resolution over here. I'm going to click, okay. And you can see that we have definitely changed our resolution, okay, in our image. But however, we can notice something very, very interesting from before and after. What we can notice is that nothing really has changed in terms of our window over here, okay? Our window that we have previously, okay, put here in our clip and centered around our protagonist or our character in here, right? It's still the same, okay? Even though we have changed the resolution, okay? We are at a 30, as I said, Ultra HD right now compared to the previous HD. The window stays in the same position. Nothing has changed. Well, why is it important to understand this? Well, this is important because now what is this is telling us, okay? This is telling us that this behavior is actually one of the best features in Resolve, okay? When you're grading or when you're applying effects, because the program, right, what we are doing here with any of the windows or any like effect that you apply is basically resolution independent. You can just change your frame size and aspect ratio in your project, but you're not going to affect any of the clips or the secondary grades or any effects or generators, anything that you add, okay? And that's true for whether you're in the cut page, edit page, fusion, or color pages, okay? So that is something very important to understand, that don't be afraid that, oh, if I change resolution, is that going to change also rescale, in this case being my window? Is it going to make it smaller or bigger? What is that going to happen to it? Well, nothing is going to happen to it because Resolve is smart enough to tell you, you know what, I got this, all right? Now, one thing that you can notice here, the difference is this handle. It's much larger than the previous one, which was a bit shorter. But other than that, you can't virtually see any difference, okay? Because as I said, this is all resolution independent, okay? So works in its own way. And that is very, very important. So now in this case, we can go back over here, okay? And we can change it once again to just regular HD, just like as we had it earlier. And it's over here, 1920 by 1080. You can see, as I said, the only thing that changed here was really the handle, which was shorter in 1920 by 1080, which you're going to see it right now in a second. And once I press here, save, as you can see, right, that's the only thing that changed. Nothing else has changed. So something for you to be aware of, okay, in case you're wondering, oh, but what's that going to happen to my clip? Is that going to ruin it? Is that going to... No, it's not, okay? So now, we can also remove this vignette. This was for the sake of showing you guys, all right, what that does. So now, something very important to understand, and something that when I first started doing color, I, ran through this trap of not knowing what is the 4K to 1080p workflow, okay? So say you shot something in 4K, and now you have your timeline in 1080p. Why would you want to do that? Well, very simple. It's because you have clips in 4K that could be very processing intensive and can slow down your machine extensively, okay? So now you're trying to avoid that. So what you could do technically is get your 4K footage imported, all right? And then you work on a 1080p timeline. And then what you're going to do, so you do your edit, you finish everything that, okay, doesn't require you quality, but rather you want speed, all right, playback time. So editing is perfect for that. And the moment, all right, that you want to start color grading, okay, once you want to start color grading, this is something very important, guys. Remember this, you want to revert back to your 4K footage, okay? Do not think that you could have 4K footage, work in a timeline in 1080p, grade in 1080p, and then switch it back to 4K right before rendering, because we have some problems there. Okay, so what you want to do is, once again, take the 4K footage, take it back to 1080p, okay, where you're going to do your editing, which, as I said, you don't need quality for that. And then what you're going to do right before starting grading, think of it like this, right before you get into color page in your project, revert it back to your 4K footage if you shot in 4K, okay? This is important because, why is that important? It's important because there is a few features like key-dependent secondary grading tools, things like a qualifier, for instance, right? It's basically resolution dependent. So what that means is that if you key something in 1080p, all right, the image resolution, it's going to affect that. You having a 1080p image, right, you're not going to get as clean of keys as you would in 4K. Okay, so you are truly advised, the book talks about this, to change the timeline, okay, to full media resolution before you start your color grading, not after. Okay, so you're advised. So be aware of this because it's something very important to understand. Okay, cool. So now that we talked about that, there is also something else that you could use, which is something that we haven't really talked about. But say you want to rescale a clip that is rather, whether it's in 720p to like 1080p, okay, or a 1080p clip to a 4K, right, to 4K timeline. So you want to scale up. Okay, you can use this, all right, using a upscaling feature called the super scale inside of Resolve. Okay, so that is something that you also need to understand. And you can do that very, very simple by going to your clip attributes, and then in the video tab, you have the super scale pop-up menu, and then you can choose, you know, something like 2x or even higher to up the resolution. Okay, so that would improve the resolution of your clips, which is something that you can do as well. Now, remember that once you do that, that is also processor intensive, so that can slow down your computer as well. So it's something that for you to be aware, just in case you're wondering, how's that going to perform? Well, it's going to slow it down for sure, because you're upscaling, okay, using the super scale feature inside of Resolve. Great. Now, let's talk about reframing. So now we understood resolution, okay, so far, and let's talk about reframing and reframing specifically individual clips inside here in the color page. Okay, so we're going to go on clip number 15, if you remember from the previous lesson where we had our balance and track. Okay, and what we're going to do, the first thing is that we're going to deactivate the track, because remember, this is processing intensive and we don't want to slow down our computer, but we want to go a little bit faster. Okay, so just for the sake of this, we're going to just deactivate the track so we can move a little bit faster. Perfect. So now the first thing we're going to do, all right, here is we are going to, as I said, reframe things and see how that's going to work. Okay, and how is that going to affect all of our clips? So now what we're going to do is we are going to go back to our scale, or I should say sizing. This is our sizing palette. Okay, something very, very important. And what we're going to do is scale things up. So let's see how that works. So here on the zoom, we are going to take it up. I'm going to type here 1.5, okay, to something like that. And what happens when we scale this, okay? Is this now scaling just this individual clip, or is it going to scale everything? Let's see. So if we go back to this clip, to clip number 14, which is the one previous to it, or all the other different clips, you can see that nothing really has changed. The only thing that was scaled in this case was this clip over here, as you can see. Why is that happening? Well, that is happening because we are here, okay, into our input sizing, okay? So now that's affecting the individual clip. It's not affecting all the other different clips. So that is something to be aware. So what we're going to do now is we are going to change things up, okay, to basically affect everything rather than just this clip. So what I'm going to do over here, since we scaled only this one, we can just reset it very quickly here on reset all. And instead, we are going to go to the next one, which is the output sizing, right close to the input sizing. Okay, input sizing affects your individual clip. Output sizing, it's going to affect now everything. Okay, it's not going to affect just this one once we make a change, but it's going to affect every single clip that we have here in our timeline. So let's go back to our zoom. Okay, double click. I'm going to press 1.5, just like that. And now we are going to check if that has scaled, in fact, everything. And you can see as we scroll through them that in fact it has. You can see that. And this is a very nifty feature in the sense that it allows you now to basically very quickly, you can go to your output sizing and rescale your entire timeline. Okay, so this is useful if you're going on a timeline-based sort of adjustments and you really want to, I don't want to work on a single clip, I want to work on entire timeline. I want to make this change to everything. So that could be very useful to rescale like that. Okay, so now what we're going to do in this case, we are going now to go back to reframe our shots and see how we can reframe them individually. Okay, because now we did, all right, zoom in everything, but what if now I want to go back and reframe them individually? Because, I might want to do a pan or a tilt that is very different from the next clip or the one that is previous to it. Okay, so that is something to be aware. So how do we do that? Well, instead of being here, very self-explanatory at this point, instead of using the output sizing, what we're going to do is change it back to the input sizing, because we want to change just this clip. Now, a visual sign that tells you that things are changing, you could see it here as well. You can see that here on the clip level, but once I change to output, look what it says here, timeline. That is also another sign, okay? It's another hint telling you, okay, you are affecting everything on the output. So we're going to go back to our input sizing, as you can see over here. And what we're going to do now, we're going to make a few changes. As I said, we are going to change our pan, right, to something like 45, okay, to pan it a little better. And then we're going to change also our tilt to something like 50, okay? So now we have reframed our clip. And we can do the same for clip number 12, okay? So this clip right over here. And once again, make sure that you're in input sizing. And here we have our options, just like we did earlier. On our pan, we're going to type here -70, okay? And then we are going to change our tilt as well to about 150, just to see how we can reframe things. And you can see how easily, all right, you're able to reframe clips very, very quickly. And this is very useful because, once again, you can go output sizing, change up everything, input sizing, start making individual adjustments as you like. Now, with that done, let's look at some of the other features over here, all right? So let me explain to you what all of these are. Okay, so now over here, we have the edit sizing. Now, the edit sizing, basically, it's the same as you would do in the inspector, okay? So it reflects all the transform changes that you applied in the inspector, all right, in the edit page. So they're sort of connected, basically. All right, so then we have the input sizing over here. That applies transform changes, okay, in the color page, okay? Basically, it does the same thing the edit sizing is doing, which is our previous one, all right? Basically the same thing, but the function, this one, limits it only to the color page. That is the only difference, right? So this is limited to the color page. That's something else. Now, you have the output sizing. This applies to the entire project, the entire timeline, as we discussed earlier, and as you can see it affected here as well. And then you have something here, which is also resembles nodes, as you can see. And in fact, this is the, as you can see, node sizing. Now, node sizing applies it to the selected node in the node editor. Remember this, to the selected node, not clip, to the node. All right, so it's a little bit more targeted. We are going to go through this as well. And finally, something that we've done in the past, as you remember, previous exercises, we have our reference sizing. Right, so now this applies it to the reference still that we have chosen, all right, that is active in the viewers. Remember when we did the wipes, right? You had a clip selected and then you had a reference. That is basically what this is, right? So that's it. That is your reference sizing. And right close to it, you have reset all. Over here, you can reset it. Say you change your mind, you want to reframe in a different way. You can reset everything over here. And finally, you have a few different options over here, okay? If you want to save a new preset, say you created something, you liked it, you save as a new preset, and then you can load it, right? In case you don't want to every time, right, resize everything, because it could be very time consuming. All right, perfect. Now, something else that it's also very important to point out, all right, before we jump to our next exercise, it's something else that I've seen mainly on like also independent films. It's very common now among very artsy movies, all right, where you have art house movies, or you are sort of doing very customized, all right, aspect ratios. And now here on the custom, you can do that. So basically you can type custom here and you can change it to whatever parameters you want to input and then have your desired, okay, aspect ratio, which is also something very, very useful. But be aware though that if you change the aspect ratio or resolution into your clip to something that is not industry standard, okay, you could have some issues and you might not be able to play it on some playable either projectors or video players. So choose carefully, okay? So now, when you know for sure that you're outputting to equipment that has standard video formats, it's better to use common preset resolutions, okay? Because you're sure, all right, that you are getting the right aspect ratio. You're sure that you're not running through issues. So now, either way, that is something that is up to you, what you want to do, but there's something to be aware that the book also obviously talks about. Cool. So now with that done, we're going to play safe. We are on 1920 by 1080, our standard. And now that we've learned a bit about that, let's talk about the node sizing, okay? So how we can use the node sizing and what does it do, all right? So we're going to go back here to our node sizing, as you can see, and everything looks very similar, by the way. It's not like major differences, as you could see, but it's what they do that really makes a difference. So now, what we're going to do, first of all, is we are going to reset, okay, everything that we did earlier. And to reset, you can just go back here on reset all, okay? And you can reset this one, as you can see, input, and you can reset this one as well, which is the output. So I guess something that you need to do is that make sure that you select first your sizing mode, and then you reset that, all right, for each, if you make a difference. The same is true, by the way, for the sizing here, the reference sizing also. Okay, because if you leave it like that, it's you always have to reset it, okay, back to normal. Okay, perfect. So now with clip 15, we're back here. What are we going to do now is we are going to add a new node. We're going to press Option S, and we are going to add what's called a backplate, okay, to something like that. All right, so this is our backplate. Then we are going to add a layer mixer node. All right, if you don't know what that is, I would highly suggest you to look back at the previous lessons. All right, so I'm going to do this with a shortcut. And now we've added here a layer mixer node. As you can see, I'm going to make this a bit up here, and we are going to also rename this one to crop, okay, something like that. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to, with the crop selected here, this node, we are going to change it to our window over here, and we're going to select this one over here, and I'm going to zoom out a bit and now make a different selection. So do something like that, and we are going to adjust it a bit. Something that should work, and then something like that, right? Extend it to something like that should be pretty good for us. Now, with that done, we can now see that we have, it's affecting here our crop, as you can see. But the next thing I'm going to do here on the soft is take all of these ones to 0, okay? We don't want any softness going on over here. Now, for you to see better, because this might be hard, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. And then here, by the way, you can press Z if you wanted to, right, get a little bit closer. But here I am going to adjust this a little bit better here, and same over here. Okay, go up a bit, and then here, go down, and that should be pretty good. I'm actually going to make this a little bit larger, something like that. Okay, right over here, as you can see. And as I said, take all the softness to 0, and now we currently have something really, really nice. So now what are we going to do with our crop selected? Once again, we are going to go on our sizing, and into our sizing, we are going to change it to that node sizing, okay? So we are into our node sizing. Once again, now every parameter that we're changing, anything that we're doing, it's going to affect the node, that specific node. That is the major difference between this and the input sizing, okay? Great, so now, for instance, I can go here on zoom, and we can 2x this one, so zoom it to something like that. You can see already that we have a very, very interesting effect, okay? Now, the backplate remains unchanged, as you can see. The same is happening there. But what we're doing here into our crop node over here, we're making some major differences. We're changing a lot of it. So now we are going to also change the pan to something like that. Okay, perfect. And you can see that we have something really cool over here. And the next thing we're going to do is also tilt this a bit up. So go up a bit to about 300, okay? And this is where we're getting right now, okay? Very, very interesting. And now what we could do is also, if we want to adjust our backplate, because remember, we're working on our crop right here, But what if we want to work on our backplate? Well, just select that node over here, right? Once again, we are on the node specific mode. Remember that it's very, very important. So make sure that you're on the right mode every single time. And then what we're going to do is also change that different pan over here. So we are going to pan it left, actually. So we're going to drag this way. Okay, so it fits right here. Perfect. So now we should have something like that, which is looking pretty good. And now we can also make all the differences, all the adjustments that we want. So in this case, we can come here in our offset, drag it, make it blue, something like that. Okay, and then we can also take our lift and do the opposite. Okay, make it a little bit warmer. Okay, not too much, something like that. Okay, so you can see that now, and we are making a big difference into our clip. And you can also, by the way, Command D, you can see that you can activate and deactivate all your clips. Okay, and now what we want to do is also drag the gain master wheel over here to brighten the image a bit. Okay, something like that. And then maybe with the lift, with the red, we went a little too far. And at the offset, we can be a little more blue. Something like that should work. Perfect. All right, so now you can see that we have something very, very interesting. And now if I play, look at that effect that you can create. Okay, so it's really cool, as you can see, creating something like that. So these are some of the options, okay, that you could use with the node sizing, specifically this one, as I said, because it only affects that node, and you can make all sort of different adjustments, okay? You can even, in fact, do compositing with this, all right? In fact, a lot of people use it, okay, to create composites and really duplicate things over itself, and then applying crop tools, all different sort of effects, okay, that you could adapt to it. Very, very cool. All right, so now the next thing we're going to do is we are going to create cover-ups with the patch replacer effect, okay? So here on the clip, we are going to go to a different clip. So in this case, we're going to go back on our clip number 5 over here. That's the one that you would see. And now remember, for these ones, you will need the studio version. If you don't have the studio version, you're not going to be able to use specifically the patch replacer effect because they don't have it. So there's something that to be aware, okay? But you can also look at this, and I think you can do it probably in the free version, but is with the watermark. I'm not sure if you're able to, but I just wanted to let you know that this is on the studio version. All right, so now what we're going to do is we are going to create a new node over here, and we are going to call this a cover up, okay? So now, before I start doing anything, what are we trying to do here? So we can look at our image over here. Let's make it a bit bigger so you could see, and press Z, okay? So you see the clip better. We can see that everything is great, all right? We have great composition, great production design, everything is working. However, we have the thermostat here, and maybe it's not fitting the scene, all right? They weren't able to remove it on set, and now they're asking you to, I don't want this, I want to remove it, and yeah, just stick it out of there. Okay, so now this is often stuff that, VFX team will be doing or compositing, but that is something that you could easily do also in the color page over here. So we're going to show you how you can do this very, very quickly. So now the first thing we're going to do here is with our cover up node just created, we're going to go into our effects. Remember, in the effects, you have two options. You can, all your favorites are here, something that I talked about the previous lesson as well. So useful, by the way. So in this case, the cover up, all right, the patch replacer should say effect, it's not here. It's not start for me. So I'm going to go here on show all, and you can just type patch, by the way, or alternatively look through the list. And this is the patch replacer. All right. So now what we have to do is just drag this and into our cover up over here. And you can see that now we have two oval shaped objects over here. So now the two outlines. Let's explain what these outlines are and what they do. So now the left outline over here, this is the source patch, okay, which is basically sampling a portion of a video under it. So it's basically sampling whatever you place it at. On the right side over here, this is your target patch, okay? So this is where in this case, our target is going to be our thermostat, so that's where we're going to place it. Now, it's very easy. It looks complicated, but it's really not at all. So what we're going to do in this case is we're going to take our target patch, remember, and we're going to place it above it, okay, to something like that. We can make this a little bit smaller. And what I'm going to do now, you can see that I placed it above it, all right? It's over here, and I know for a fact, but why is it showing me something so strange like this? Once again, because now, in this case, we need to move, all right, our source patch to a different location. Remember, the source patch is basically cloning whatever the source patch sees. It's basically into our target patch. So we're going to put it somewhere close by here. We're going to make also these a bit smaller, okay? Now you can see that this is right above it over here, and I can move this also a tiny bit closer, okay, to something like that. And you can see that now, you're making sure that obviously everything is centered right, okay? And now in the source patch, in the patch replacer, I should say, the patch replacer, we have the keep original detail, okay, this checkbox over here. Now, if I check that, now I can see, okay, what basically we're outlining here. You can see that we're a bit off. Now, you can also zoom in, right, with your scroll wheel, and then you can basically move around it. And now I see better. I'm going to make sure that the thermostat and its shadows, right, it's entirely covered here. Okay, something like that should be good for us. Okay, just like that. So I'm making sure that basically everything is inside our patch here, because if it was outside, then we would have a problem. Okay, and now if I go here on keep original detail, you can see that that disappears. I'm going to press Z to show you, okay, something like that. And you can see that now that disappeared. However, we're going to have a problem. And I can tell you this right before we do anything else, because remember one thing, very important rule in compositing most of the time. It's called tracking. You need to track things, okay? So now, if obviously our image here, the clip is going to move, all right? And we're going to get out of bound very fast. So look, once we play it, you can see that we're having issues there. And that is unacceptable. Obviously, we can't have something like that. So now what we need to do is make sure to track this, right? And do it right. Because otherwise, you're going to run through this issue, and that is not going to work, okay? So what we're going to do over here, you can see that we so far have talked about the tracker, but what we've talked about is just the basic tracker over here, as you can see. We have never really gone through these other options over here. You also do have a stabilizer, and you also do have an FX tracker, all right? You have all of these. So now, in this case, the one we care about is the FX tracker, all right? Now, the issue is that if I press the FX, okay, FX tracker over here, and nothing is happening, that is because I need to add it. So we have this add tracker point. You can see that now we do have a crosshair right here in the center of our image. However, what are we tracking? Where's the thermostat? That's an issue, right? Because we can see. Because to track, ideally, we need the point that, right, we're trying to remove, which is the thermostat. So now, let's do that. But I can't see it. Well, remember that what we were talking about, that we have that keep original detail, okay? So now, once you click that, now the thermostat is back into the wall. So now that is going to allow us to now track it to that point. So I can take now this and basically place it where it needs to be, which is right over there. And now all I have to do, I am going to track this forward for the entirety of the clip, and the problem should be fixed. So let's see if that works. So over here, we're going to track it forward. As you can see, Resolve, by the way, has an amazing tracker. I mean, it's unbelievable how good Resolve is at tracking. It's just so great. So now with that done, okay, you can see that now, though, we can see our tracker over here, and we can see the thermostat. So first of all, let's hide. Okay, let's go off. So we don't have the crosshair anymore in our frame. And you can see that the problem still persists. Once again, it's very easy. All you have to do is keep that original detail, uncheck that, okay? And now once we play the clip, you can see that we've effectively now removed, as you can see, very, very easily. Okay, so that is something that, once again, takes just a bit of, understanding what you need to do and put things together, all right? Use the source patch, so use the target patch to target your area, source patch, okay? Clone a different area close by, right? track everything, and that's it. That's all you have to do. It's very, very easy. Yeah, it's very, very useful. Now, something else that also wanted to talk about is that you can ideally also do the same operation with, okay, you can go back into your sizing. You can do the same, perform basically the same using the node sizing, okay? Basically, you can have a backplate node, right? And then create a layer node and then use a power window to sample, okay, the clean portion of your video. Basically the same process we're doing. And it's also very, very good to do it that way. Now, if the image is moving, then it will be a little bit different, but the process is basically the same, okay? You could use power windows as well and basically select a single area and then replace, you know, whatever we want to replace with that selection. So there is a lot you can do, and Resolve is so great because it offers you so many different options to do many different things. Now, something else that you might be wondering is that, what about in the effects over here, okay? So I'm going to add a new node, by the way, just quickly over here. There's also something very, very powerful, which is the object removal over here, okay? And something that probably most of you might know better than the patch removal. Now, the object removal is also used for cover-up work, and it's also in the same category, which is the revival category inside of all the different lists over here. Now, the difference is that the patch remover samples from a video frame, from a current video frame that you're selecting. Object removal uses basically information from all the surrounding frames, okay, to cover up any object or anything that you're using. So it's a little bit of a different process, okay? Now, all of this information is in the book, by the way, so I'm going based off of that as well. So you can, you know, look up the textbook and find all this information. Alternatively, if you want a tutorial about the object removal over here that we just spoke about, let me know so I can do a quick 10-minute video showing you how quickly we can use the object removal and really, you know, use that instead of the patch replacer, which we used in this lesson, which is also very useful. Okay, so I'm going to delete that, and now you can see that we have our clean image over here. Okay, so that is very, very good. Right, so now with that done, we are going to jump into our next topic, which is keyframes. All right, keyframes is something that we haven't talked about much in the course of these lessons, and there's something that we are going to learn now. It's very simple once you just understand a few concepts and how the interface works. Great. So now the next thing we're going to do here, I am going to open up the clips and move to the beginning, which is this first clip over here. And what we're going to do is close the clips once again, and we're going to play this. All right. So now I'm going to stop for a second here, because remember that you have this loop option. Okay. Very, very useful here in the color page, because sometimes you're playing a clip, and I bet has happened to all of you, and you know, you're interested in grading that one clip, all right? With the hero shot, you play the clip and then keeps going to the, you know, the next clip and then the next one, which is kind of annoying, especially if you have this off like this, then you got to go and find it, right? So just make sure to have this loop on if you want to stay on that clip. Okay, so that's like a little tip right there. All right, so I am going to make this bigger so you could see, and we're going to look at this clip over here. Now, the clip is shot on a tripod. It's static, all right? And, you know, it's showcasing this city. And we're going to add keyframes to sort of add that time-lapse kind of effect to it, all right? So we're going to introduce first some movement and then also some color, okay? So switch it from something that starts off with it's darker and then, you know, we go to more of a sunset or sunrise look, okay? To something like that. Perfect. So let's get started with that. The first thing I'm going to do over here is number one thing, we are going to brighten up our image over here. So on this first node, we are going to rename this to normal, as we are going to normalize. And over here, we are going to increase the shadows, okay, to something like that. And then do the same here with our gamma. I'm going to go up a bit. All right, and now you can see that by doing this, that introduces quite a lot of noise. Now you can't see it as much yet, okay, because obviously this is a still, but once I play the clip, you can see all of that. It's noise. Okay, so now we are going to target this in our next exercise after doing the keyframes. Okay, so first keyframes, then we're going to take care of the noise over here, okay? And we're going to do some noise reduction later on. Perfect. So now with our image normalized, now we are going to go into our keyframes. Now, where are the keyframes? Well, it's very simple. the keyframes are down here, okay? Remember, we have our left, center, or middle, and right palette, all right? The keyframes are always over here on your right palette where it says keyframes, okay? You can see it's over here. It's a little bit small right now, but you have this option over here to expand it, right? Split primary and secondary views, okay? So you have something like that. And now you can see that what happens is that once I do that, all of these, right, palettes are now put together over here since we did expand our keyframes palette over here. You can see that now they're like that, right, in two separate palettes, and now everything is put together over here. All right, so now we're going to work with this expanded. All right, we also have this option over here to, as you can see, zoom in or out, and then the option to choose between color, sizing, and all. I'm going to keep it to all right now. Now, what we can see here is I can, all right, open or close each. Okay, so this is what we have right now. We have our corrector 1 and we have our sizing. Now, the corrector 1 is represented by our, obviously our node over here, okay? The node that we just renamed to normal. Since we only have one node, we only have one corrector. And then the sizing, okay, by opening it, you can see that we have our input sizing, all right? Convergence, all right? Float window and auto align right over here, okay? And close to it, you have your keyframes, okay? This is where you add your keyframes. And then you also have the option here to disable, as you can see, and then also to lock, case you need to do so. Perfect. So now with that done, we also are going to add another keyframe. We're going to add another node, forgive me. So now once you add another node, look what happens in the keyframe palette over here. So I'm on first one, I am going to press over here option S, that adds a new node, and you can see that that's represented now into our keyframes palette. We can see you have corrector 1, which is our normal, and corrector 2, which in fact we are going to rename now to a sunrise. Okay, just like that. Perfect. Okay, now with that, we can see that we're doing pretty well, right? So very simple up to now. Now, the next thing we're going to do is to add some movement, right, to this clip that we have right here. And how do we do that? Well, we're going to start with our sizing because we want to zoom in and then play a bit with the panning and a little bit with also the tilt, okay? So just like really add a little bit of movement to our clip over here. So now to do that, obviously it's not going to be in our corrector because we have other type of parameters here. So I'm going to close that. We're going to go into our sizing over here. And the one we care about is our input sizing, okay? So, which is, by the way, if you remember earlier when we talked about all the different options, all right? So it's basically this one that we were using earlier. Okay, so that's our input sizing over here. And this is our keyframe option. All you have to do, you are going to add a keyframe right over here on our input sizing. And now what you can do is right click over here. You can add a static keyframe or a dynamic keyframe. Dynamic keyframes are keyframes that move gradually. Static keyframes is more the abrupt, okay, keyframe. The one we're going to start with is the dynamic, all right? So we're going to add a dynamic keyframe. With that now selected, remember you right click to access that. With that selected, now you can go to the end of your timeline. Now you can see something very interesting here, that by hovering or moving the playhead, that's reflected in the viewer as well. So whether you do it here or you do it here, these two are linked, okay? So it doesn't matter which one you're using. And yeah, so now with that done, we can now add all the different properties that you need, whether you're doing a very crazy zoom and then, you know, a crazy pan, a whip pan, or some sort of tilt. You can all do it very simple right over here. So we're going to start with our zoom, of course, and we are going to type 1.5. So we get something like that, okay, as you can see. And the next thing we're going to do is change our pan over here to about -400. And then we are going to also change our tilt to -200. So we should have something like that. Okay, and now once we play the clip, you can see exactly what's happening here. Okay, we are getting that effect of just zooming in and moving a bit the pan and tilt into our clip. Okay, so now this is it's making this clip a little bit more dynamic, as you can see. And it's very, very simple, just like that. All right. Now, once again, remember to have this loop button, because if you don't have it, every time it's going to go to the next clip. All right. And it's pretty frustrating, let me tell you. So, okay. So we're going to go to the beginning of our clip over here. Now, the next thing we're going to do, now that we've actively done some changes, okay, to our position values with our dynamic keyframe, as we just learned, the next thing we're going to do now is play a little bit with the color, okay, color values. Okay, and how do we change, in fact, color values over time? Okay, so a cool effect is going from, as I said, a dark or at night, right? You can see this a lot in movies, by the way, when they want to show the passage of time. It starts at night and then, transitions during day. Okay, so that's done with keyframes as well, okay? So if you want to sort of give that effect. Now, the application to what you can do with this, with keyframes is just... There's so many different things you could do. It's really up to you. But this is just a quick example of what you can do. So now with that done, quick note over here is that if you move with your left and right brackets in your keyboard, you can navigate between keyframes. Okay, it's very simple, just like that. It's not arrow up and down. It's your left and right brackets inside of your keyboard. Okay, so just something that for you to be aware of. Cool. So now I'm here on my sunrise node, okay? And what we're going to do now is we are going to expand. Over here, we expanded earlier our sizing palette. But this case, now we want to work on our color. So instead, we are going to go in our corrector too. You can see that we have a bunch of options here. Okay, you have a lot of different options, in fact. All of them, we are going to explore them maybe in a different tutorial. But right now, we are going to focus on really what we want to do. Okay, so now the one that we care about in this case, it's going to be the color corrector over here, this keyframe over here. Perfect. And what we're going to do, remember to be in the first frame, okay, of your clip. And you can, once again, come here and then on the color corrector, you can click that. And now you have actively, okay, added a keyframe to your color corrector. Because remember, that is what we are trying to now affect. And what we're going to do is we are going to go in our primaries over here, and we're going to start with our gamma, all right? And we are going to darken it. So we're going to start something like that, like make it a bit dark, okay? It's night, something like that. And then we can also add a bit, make it a little more blue, make it feel like really it's a night. You can even make it a little bit darker, something like that, maybe. Something like that should work. It's a little bit pushed, but just to show you, okay? So this is a cool night, all right? Temperature. And then what we could do, since at night, the perceived saturation at night is lowered compared to the daylight, all right? We are also going to lower the saturation to something like 35, okay? So you could see that we took some of that color off, all right? So now that should work pretty okay for us. Now what we can do is remember, you can move the playhead once again, either on your palette here, on your keyframes palette, or in the viewer. It's really up to you. And now what we can do is now change this, because remember, we want to turn it from a cool night to something very, very bright, all right? To a sunrise, as we said. So now what we're going to do, we are at the end, and this is how the transition is going to happen, because it's happening over time. So what we're going to do is to now bring back some of the color, starting with the saturation, change this to 50, all right? And that brings, now you can see that we have, all right, this is telling us that in our corrector too, and our color corrector, that we're making a change. We're actively now making a change. And now we can change also we can see that we made a difference here in the gamma. So now we can technically reset all of this because we don't need it anymore. So I can go to something like that, as you can see, into our gamma, and that resets it the way we had it. Then we can add a little bit of contrast here to something like 1.3. So you can see that that's adding quite a lot of contrast, okay? And now in our gain, okay, we are going to push it towards orange, yellow, okay? Something like, okay, that's a little bit too pushed. So let me redo this. Something like that should do it, okay? So now we can see that we're having a bit more, we brought back that very warm look into our image. And then we are going also to change a bit the you can see that we have also shadows and the highlights. Something that I don't see used as often. Now, the shadows and highlights parameters, all right, over here in the adjustment controls, why would you want to use these? Well, because these are very well designed, okay, for retrieval of detail, okay, specifically targeted towards shadows and highlights. So that's why these are very good. Now, in the book, they talk about adding a gradient at the end here on your clips, and then play a little bit with shadows and highlights to really see how they affect your image and really how they can improve it or really target those tonalities that you need. And I find them very useful at times. At times, you know, I use something very different, but that is something that you can also do. Remember, you have them here, shadows and highlights. Okay, so I'm going to increase it to about 50 over here, to something like that. And you can see that now we have targeted the highlights specifically. Now, if we do play our clips with our loop here, you can see that, look what happens. We turn our image from night to sunrise, just like that. Okay, you can see that effect is really, really cool. Awesome. And you can see how powerful that is. It's awesome, isn't it? So that is something that, as you can see, you should definitely make full advantage of, especially when you're creating, say, whether you're doing a movie scene, okay, where you need to show a passage of time, things are moving, or when you're working on, say, something like your reel or something, you know, your creative project. It's definitely cool to implement, right, these kind of effects and really add a little bit of style to your cinematography or editing. Now, another quick thing here is that if you do, you can also resolve effects, whether you add resolve effects can also be keyframed, okay? When they're added here to the pipeline, you can see that the resolve effect would have its own name, so you can find it very easily here into this, okay? Into your list over here. Now you can see that we have a lot of them because I'm on corrector too. So once I close it, now we're a little bit more organized. And once again, the visuals here are telling us that basically we have added keyframes. That's a visual representation. So we know that we've done on corrector number 2, which is our sunrise, because that where we added, okay, our cool night to our warm sunrise over here, and then our sizing where we did our zooming, panning, and tilting, okay, just like that. So now something else to really talk about is this, is that if we play the clip, do you notice something strange? I'm going to play a few times so you could see. You can see that, okay, the animation, all right, is good. It's looking good, but it feels a little bit too mechanical, right? Almost like a real person wouldn't zoom like this. It's too perfect, right? It feels too much like, all right, it goes from point A to point B perfectly. And perfection in the real world doesn't exist, okay? So you also want to sort of emulate that, right? Unless this is the effect that you're going for. I mean, that's a creative choice. But to make it feel a little bit more realistic, we can also do that where, say, you want to show it as if, you know, the operator, in this case, or cinematographer, zoomed in, and we want to sort of add that kind of effect, okay? So now, we're going to go back to the beginning of the clip, all right? We are on frame 1, and what we're going to do, we are going to come into the input sizing. So I'm going to, here on the sizing, we're going to open it once again, and you can see that we have our input sizing, and we can right click over here, okay? And we have a few different options. Now, the one we did earlier was the dynamic keyframe, all right, over here, and then we have the static keyframe. Remember, once again, dynamic keyframe sort of add a gradual transition, while the static is more abrupt, just in case you're wondering what they do. But anyway, and the one thing we're going to do here is to right click over here, and you can see that we have a few different options. We're going to change now and choose this change dynamic attributes, okay? Because we want a little bit more targeted options. And once I open that, then you can see that we have a dissolve type over here, okay? And underneath we have a start dissolve and an end dissolve. What we want to do here is we want to change a little bit the start dissolve, okay? So we can change it to 2. By the way, you can see by dragging, okay, you can see all the different effects that you can add. So in this case, we're going to keep it to something like this, okay? We're going to keep the end dissolve the way it is because it's good for us. And then we're going to click OK. All right, so now it's going to show you that instead, right, instead of starting just from point A to point B, it kind of like takes a second for, say, the operator to zoom in. Okay, so that could look a little bit more realistic, just like that. Another quick thing that you could do here, okay, just as we spoke earlier, is that now in this case we use dynamic keyframes, but you can also use static keyframes, all right? So you can sort of alternate when you right click between static and dynamic. So maybe you wanted to start abrupt and then end it gradually, or maybe you want something opposite, right? Where you start very gradually but then ends abrupt, say like a light bulb turning off or anything like that. So really you can choose, and it's all dependent on your creative aesthetics, all right? So what you exactly are looking for. So that is a little bit about that. Now that we've done that, let's talk a bit about noise reduction, because as you can see, we did bring substantial noise into our image. And next thing we're going to do is we want to definitely fix that. Okay, so let's see how we can do that. Perfect. So the first step we're going to take over here is to create obviously a new node before we move forward. Okay, and also I am going now to close this, maybe open the scopes here and just set it to these curves. Okay, so just that, you know, everybody's more familiar with this look. So now what we're going to do, as I said, we are going to create a new node, all right, brand new, and we are going to rename this. I usually rename them to an R standing for noise reduction. In this case, we are going to say denoise, just like that, okay? And that's our third node over here. Perfect. Now, how do we get to the denoise, or how do we add the noise reduction into our node? There is mainly two different ways. Okay, so let me show you. If you're in the color page, all you have to do is come here to your motion effects. You can click that, and now you can see that we have our motion effects over here. Don't worry about all of this because I'm going to explain every single thing what it does here. So now, with that said, there is also another way. Say you're in the cut page or in a different page. Okay, edit page, cut page, whatever page you are in, there's a different way. You can just go here to your effects, and you can also type the effect that you want. So in this case, we want that noise reduction. You can type it and then you can drop that. Okay, so that is also another way you can add noise reduction. Okay, just that you are aware. Perfect. So now with that done, we can see that this is our clip. Obviously, we have introduced some noise. I am going to zoom in so you can see a little bit better. You can see all of this stuff right here. As you see, as it's moving, I'm going to come back here, all of that. You can see it better when clips are playing, and it's pretty substantial. Now, we're here in the water, but you can also see it up here, okay, right over here. And we want to get rid of that because it's a bit too much, and you know, you want to make it look a bit more professional, right? Your work. So how do we get rid of that? Well, that's what we are going to explore exactly in this lesson. Okay, so now we can see that with this open in the motion effects, we have mainly three palettes, okay, to look at. We can see that we have our temporal and R, which by the way stands for self-explanatory enough, noise reduction. Okay, so this is our temporal noise reduction, this is our spatial noise reduction, and then we have the motion blur. So now the temporal noise reduction, what it does, this analyzes the video, okay, across different frames, so several frames, to detect moving subjects and backgrounds. Okay, so it makes sure to exclude those moving objects from the most aggressive noise reduction. Okay, so basically, and he's doing that because he wants to preserve the most detail. On the other hand, the spatial noise reduction works a bit differently, because what it does, when you apply the spatial noise reduction, you're basically softening now the high frequency noise. Okay, and you are trying to, Resolve is trying to retain the data levels on high detail. Okay, so basically this is very effective when you're trying to sort of adjust those very fine-tuned, fine-grained noise, okay, that maybe sometimes the temporal noise reduction is not able to catch. That's where this is optimal, okay, for those very fine-tuned, fine-grained noise that you might want to eliminate, okay. And then you have the motion blur, which obviously It's not a noise reduction tool. That is something entirely different. Now, why is this here? Because this uses the same engine as these other two, okay? The engine is the same, but this tool is very different, obviously. I think everybody knows what motion blur does. So this is great if you were trying to add some motion blur to action shots or shots that are very dynamic, okay? So you're adding that artificial motion blur to, make them more realistic, or just, you want to add motion blur and make it more believable into your project. So that is what that does. Okay, so now with that said, we are going to now look at what each of these does, especially for the temporal noise reduction and spatial noise reduction. So we're going to explore that and explain what each does. Now, we're here, and I'm looking at our image over here, and we can see that first of all, we have our frames. Okay, so now the frames tells us what do we want to analyze. Now, the higher the frames, the more we're analyzing. The lower the frames, the less we're analyzing, okay, for our noise reduction. So in this case, this can go from 1 to 5. So it's really up to you. It depends on how aggressive, okay, you analyze your image. So in this case, a number of 2 is good. So 2 is perfect for us. And under that, okay, we have now this is the motion estimation type, okay? Now the motion estimation type works, you can see that we have 3 different options here. We have the faster, we have the better, and we have the none. Okay, so now these work in a different way, in the sense that if you choose faster, you're going to have less quality, but at a better playback speed. So you're prioritizing speed over quality, okay? Now, if you're choosing none, obviously you're not adding any. And then if you're choosing better, the opposite is true. So you are prioritizing a better analysis, okay, quality analysis, but you're going to sacrifice a bit of playback speed, okay? So it's really depending on what you're working with, okay? So it's really what you're working with. In this case, we're going to keep it for this image to better, okay, because that works for us. Then over here, you can see that we have the motion range, okay? So the motion range basically allows us to indicate the speed at which the subjects are moving, okay? We are going to exclude areas, okay, with motion blur from the noise reduction effect. So now, in this case, you can see that over here, we also have large, medium, small. So now, for this clip 01, an amount of small is good, but you can also experiment a bit with this, depending on how complicated or how much noise really it's in your image, okay? So for this one, we're gonna keep it to, in this case, to small, because that would work for us. And then you can see that underneath, we have the temporal threshold over here. Now, the temporal threshold, first of all, you can see that we have the luma, chroma over here, and they're linked by this. You can unlink that, or by default is linked, by the way. So now this basically controls the actual noise reduction that is applied to the luma and chroma levels, okay? So as I said, by default, these are linked, but say you're working on a monochromatic noise or vice versa, then you can unlink them and change the parameters individually, which is highly advised to work that way. In this case, we are going to keep them connected, okay? And basically this setting will activate the noise reduction in our clip over here, okay? So now by entering, you can either enter a number in one of the 2 boxes, doesn't matter, since they're linked, they're going to change together. So if I type 60 up here, this down here is going to be 60. The moment you unlink them, then you're adjusting them individually. So we are going to then take them up, and you can see if I keep dragging up and down, okay, we are modifying our image, okay? So in this case, we're going to keep it to something, we can type here something like 15, okay? And you can see that typing that in the luma, the chroma follows as well. Now, how do we see how much temporal noise are we adding, and how much is that affecting the image? Because just like this, you could say, hey, I can first of all come here and say before and after. And I don't know if you can see that very well on YouTube, but I'm looking specifically here and here, over here. You can see that, you see, it's affecting our image, okay? But is there a better way, I guess, to see this? Yes, you can do that, and we are going to activate our highlight mode over here, okay, as you can see. And in the highlight mode, first of all, this is the highlight, then you have the highlight black and white, and the AB, okay, which is our difference over here. And now we can see that by dragging our luma and chroma, we're going to see if that makes any difference, okay? So in this case, all right, first of all, we need to reactivate it over here. If I drag a lot, you can see that. So in this case, I am going to type here something like 15, okay, where we were. And you can see that this is very aggressive, okay? In fact, it's too aggressive that we are losing a lot of that detail, okay? And I'm going to take it down even more to something like that, as you can see. And still, you know, we can barely see over here what we're doing. So we're going to take down even more, all right? Something like that. And you can see the shapes. If you can see it a bit, it's very hard right now. If I go all the way up, you can see that this is obviously too extreme. See the Ferris wheel, right? So this is, I'm at 100. In fact, if I deactivate that, right, you can see that now takes that plastic almost look. This is before, this is the after, okay? Before, after. Now, you could think that maybe this could work pretty well because, hey, you removed all of that. But the problem with that is that you are going a bit too far. And a good way to see it, a good rule of thumb, is once you activate this, if you see that things are too dark over here, okay? If you see that it's too dark, even the Ferris wheel and some of the shapes, that means that you're overly aggressive. You're adding overly aggressive noise reduction. So the good rule of thumb is take it down, all right, a little more to something like 37. Let's see. Okay. Basically, you can still see it over here, but we're going to take it a bit more up to the point where almost you can't tell. See? Now it's, you see it over here. Okay. If I'm zoomed in, I'm focused on the Ferris wheel over here, this circle right here. In case you don't see it well, I'm going to put it one more time. You see it over here. Okay. This is 100. I'm going to keep it back to 5. Okay, and now it's almost like you can't really see it. This means that this is a good noise reduction, all right? If it's too dark and starts getting these colors, that means that it's overly aggressive. That's the way to see it. All right, so now we're going to keep it at 5, and now I can deactivate that, all right? And this is the before, this is the after. So it's a very, very tiny bit of noise reduction added. Now, if you feel like, you know, you want to go up and just put it 100, and then you see before and after. I'm looking here specifically, before and after. You can go that route too if you want to go very, very aggressive with it. All right, and perfect. So now with that done, now we're going to keep it like that. If you're working in images where you have monochromatic noise and things like that, you can also uncheck this and then work on them individually. Okay, over there. Perfect. With that said, now we also are going to look underneath here. We have the motion value. So this is sort of like a pivot, all right? And basically a lower value, it's going to exclude a bigger part of the frame, okay, of the image. If you have a higher value, we basically are going to assume that less motion, okay, and targets more of the image. So basically, if you have a little motion in the image, a higher value is more appropriate, okay? If you have a lot of motion in your image, then a lower value is more appropriate. So in this case, there is not much motion, especially for basically only the one that we added artificially, which was our zoom, but there is not much motion. So it's okay if we do then in the motion, bring it up to something like 60 in this case. If you had a lot of motion, you want to do the opposite, all right? Take it down instead. And then underneath, you can see that we have the blend value. So now the blend value, I think, is pretty self-explanatory in the sense that this basically, what allows you to do is to blend the original image you had, pre-noise reduction image, okay, to blend it into this one. Now, this could be very good, especially if you feel that your noise reduction is getting too aggressive, okay, and you see that it's getting a little bit too plasticky, then I would probably like start blending it in, all right, if you feel like, oh, I went too far with the noise reduction. So you blend it in and bring the image back, okay? So that's basically what the blend feature does over here. Okay, so that's a little bit about that. And now what you could do is also, by the way, as I was telling you earlier, always toggle and untoggle that and see what kind of effect it has on your image. Once again, you have to be very subtle with these things because it's very easy to go overboard with it and then just realize after, oh, you know, I went a little bit too far. Now, let's move into the spatial noise reduction, which is a little bit different, okay? So now, as you can see here, we have a mode. This is very similar to what we explained earlier here with the motion estimation type. Okay, here it's called a mode. All right, once again, here basically we have a faster, a better, we have an enhanced. So it really depends. Basically, these all refer to different analysis algorithms, but works very similarly to what you had here. So now on a mode, something like better, for me, I've noticed that most of the time should be pretty good. Okay, other times enhanced is also great, but something like better, it's good. And once again, they sacrifice a bit of playback speed, okay, over the quality. So obviously, if you want to go for something like dirty and raw, you can always go faster, but you'd have a better playback. And then the opposite is true if you go better or enhanced. So in this case, we're going to keep it to better. And then you can see that we have a radius value here, okay, which indicates which area of the image is analyzed, okay, to basically figure out or determine the noise type. So most of the time, small is good, okay. So keeping it to small for the radius, most of the time that works pretty well. And then underneath, you can see that we have a spatial threshold. It's very, very similar to what we were doing with the temporal threshold in the sense that we're basically, you have our luma and chroma, okay, over here. And you can obviously, by adjusting one, you can see it would adjust also the other one, okay, because these two are linked, as you can see over here. So really, it depends how much you want to add. Once again, it's good to be subtle with it. So something like 40, you can see that it's really getting right over here. Look at that. It's getting, as I said earlier, all the parts that the temporal noise reduction wasn't able to catch. The spatial threshold, it's very, very good for those fine tuning and, you know, very, very fine noise. It's perfect for that kind of catching all those type of elements. And then obviously you have your blend. Once again, I generally don't really use the blend. If I feel that, of course, maybe I went too far with and it feels too plasticky, in that case, I definitely usually like bring this back a bit, or I just, you know, I'm going to be honest, I don't really use it, because then if I went too far, I'll just adjust here the spatial threshold, okay, and usually go that way. Perfect. So now with that, we can see that we have reduced the noise. Okay. So now we can go back here and scale it to fit. All right. And this is the before, this is the after. You can see it in the water over here. Look at the water. This is after. Okay, so this is before, after. Okay. You can see, let's look at the water real quick. Look at that. All of that is gone over here. And you can see it's gone over there too. And this is great. This is working really good. This is something that I really, really urge you to like not push this too far, because it's very, very easy to make things look plasticky. You know, I've done that before. Trust me, I've done it. And then it's too late when you're already renders a big project, okay? And it's a deliverable. And then you realize, oh, it's not just looking too plasticky, but you're losing that vital detail, right? You're losing very good detail that could have been so telling to the story. That's why it's important to be very subtle with these things. Perfect. So now let's talk about one final thing about this, the NR process in here. So now we put our denoise right at the end of the node pipeline over here. And you can see that now it's operating pretty well. Now, what would happen if we did move this to the beginning on the node tree? So let's try that. So we're going to press E, okay? So we've actively now removed our denoise from our node pipeline, and we are going to place it right at the top, okay? And now you can see that this makes a big difference now. In fact, the image looks even a bit cleaner now, okay? You can see that now, all right, everything is looking very, very clean. I'm gonna press Z here to rescale it to fit. And what is the process, okay? So like, what is it where should I place the noise reduction node? Well, so putting the noise reduction at the start of the node tree, it's usually advisable because it basically analyzes the original RGB data, okay? You're not, right, when you put at the end, you're not analyzing the original RGB data, but you have a bunch of nodes before it. Okay, so the analysis will be a little bit different. When you put it in the first node, it comes straight from the RGB data, all right? So that is very good because you analyze that and it affects the original data to reduce noise. Now, the problem with this, the placement, you know, of the denoise, in this case, this denoise node at the beginning, is that can impact a bit of the detail or the precision of the tools such as HSL curves or the qualifier, okay? And could technically also introduce some artifacting too early in the node pipeline. So that is a bit of a con in that case, okay? Because of the way that the denoise or the noise reduction operates. Now, applying the noise reduction at the entry can technically bypass those issues, okay, where you're introducing artifacting early in the node pipeline. All right, so but can also result, you can have an issue where you can have a less detailed image. Okay, so now what is the best solution then? Should I put it before or should I put it after? Well, the best way is to obviously experiment. Okay, if you want a cleaner, more detailed image, it's advised to put it at the beginning, even though that could introduce some artifacts, okay? And, it could be a little bit, daunting for, as we said, tools such as the qualifier or HSL curves. But then if you don't want the artifacts and you're the type of person, hey, I'm trying to avoid that, then put at the end. But you're sacrificing a little bit of that image detail. So it's really up to you, really, how you want to work, and just really experiment with it. Try it at the beginning of your node tree, and then try it at the end, move it around, and see what works best for you. Okay, I personally always put it in the beginning. Okay, every time I have a fixed node structure that I like to work with, and usually I have my NR node, noise reduction node, right at the beginning every time. I usually have two of them. If you want me to do a tutorial more in depth with actual footage that we will be color grading and looks recreations later on, we can go through that as well. But that is a conversation for another tutorial. So now I usually put in the beginning, I keep it there. There have been times, yes, that I've moved it, but most of the time for me has been right here at the beginning, and then every node comes after it. Okay, so that's a bit about that. That is a bit how you denoise things out. Once again, try to figure out what works best for you. Here we only use 2 frames, but then you can go even higher, all right? There are times I don't really use the temporal noise reduction, and I just go with the spatial noise reduction. And there are times where I need the temporal noise reduction, okay? And there are times that you don't need to go better, and there are times that you need just to use it faster. It really depends. It's so hard to say, like, do we have a setting to go about this? There's not really a setting. Like, when I say setting, I mean like a preset that you can apply. It's really so dependent on what you have in front of you on the image, all right? It depends on what was captured, all right? So if the image that was captured was pretty clean overall, then you might need something very subtle, if any, it's always better actually to avoid any noise reduction, honestly. But if you have an image that, during acquisition was very, very noisy, okay, then in that case, you might need to work a little bit differently and be a bit more aggressive with noise reduction. So it's really dependent on that. Okay, so that is a bit about noise reduction. All right, so very, very important stuff. I highly suggest you to experiment with it yourself, and then try to figure out, based on also what you learned in this lesson, try to experiment with it and sort of figure out what works best for you. Great. So now with that done, I am going to click here on the clips so we can see all of our clips, as you can see over here. And now the final part of this lesson is going to be about render cache and how can we optimize performance with render cache inside of Resolve, okay? The most important thing about caching here to understand is that there is a few levels. So the first level is what's called a fusion output cache. Okay, fusion output caching. The second level is a node caching, and finally we have a sequence caching. All right, we also have what's called a color output caching, which we're going to explain in just a few minutes. And these are sort of the levels that we have into Resolve. Now, the names, so in this case, the first one, the fusion output caching, which was also known as source caching, okay? The name basically refers to the position of the video signal's order, okay, of operations that prompts the cache. So that means that, for example, right, so when you import media, okay, you're importing media from inside of Resolve, okay? You import that media, then that media goes to the Fusion page and then is sent back to the edit page again at the end of the Fusion pipeline, right? So that takes the name of the Fusion output caching. Now, how do we activate this? This is something that we've done in a previous lesson. It's very, very simple, okay? So all you have to do here on the playback is where you can activate and deactivate all the different render caches. You can see that we have a render cache, which right now is set to none. So right now we're not enabling any caching, okay? So now, why is caching important? Well, it's important because, say we're working on very processing intensive clips, which happens, by the way, a lot, okay? And you don't think that your computer is going to handle it. And there is a problem though. You want to see in real time how things are going to play out, okay? Because you want to make sure that your artistic vision and everything is correctly done, and you just want to make sure that everything is the way you intended it to be. However, if everything is lagging, it's going to be very, very hard for you. So this is where you need the caching option. So once again, playback over here, and render cache now is set to none. All you have to do is you set it to smart. Okay, once you set it to smart, now look what happens. That you can see it here into our clips. Everything that is in red is now telling us that the Resolve is now adding the smart cache into the clips that deems necessary, that need that, okay? So these are only on the most processor intensive ones. You can see that in our clips, one here, another one is over here, and as we scroll through, okay, these are the ones that cache. Now, when it turns blue, it means that the caching is done, okay, and has cached our clip, so now we can play it in real time. All right, so now we can see that the ones in blue, we turned also our clip number 5, and clip 12 is still working on it. And you can also see which, okay, node has also over here has cached the denoise, okay, hasn't cached the other ones. Why is that? It's because it's caching only processor intensive operations or effects, in this case denoising being one of them. That is very powerful. The standard corrector tools inside of Resolve, such or secondaries, okay, they're not powerful enough for us to need to be cached, basically. So that's why the denoise is the only node that so far you've seen here being cached, okay, by Resolve over here. Perfect. So now this is when we're working, okay, into, this is the first level. The second level now, it's the node cache. And let's look at how the node cache also works, okay? Now, this doesn't, you don't necessarily have to do it in the color page. You can also, by the way, do it in the edit page or cut page, okay? So in the edit page, you could see it. Over here, we have the blue line above it, which is basically telling us that this, all right, is cached, render cache, and render cache, okay? So all these 3 clips. Those were the ones that Resolve deemed necessary to cache. And that is why the name Smart Cache, okay? Because it's not going to cache everything, but only the ones that Resolve thinks it's really necessary, okay? Perfect. I've said cache so many times, but bear with me. All right, so now we are going to go back into our color page over here, and let's look at how the node cache in this case works. As the name suggests, what it means is that we, instead of going on a timeline or clip based, we are more focused on the node specific one, okay? So into the node editor, we can see over here, we have our clips. One alternative way to also see where you're caching better is to also activate your timelines over here. And you can see sort of the same thing you can see into your edit page over here with the blue lines above the clips, which is obviously telling us that that is cached, okay? And you can see it here. So if you want a visual representation, it's just activate your timelines over here so you could see, okay, what you were seeing also in the edit page. Perfect. So now we are here, okay, in our clip number 1, and you can see that this is our denoise, okay, and that is the one that has been cached. Now, look what happens when I deactivate it, okay? It's now, see, that disappears from over here. It's because I deactivated this node. Remember, we're working on a node-based, okay, caching mode. So once I deactivate it again, see, it takes a few seconds, but then it quickly caches that out. And now I can basically play the clip in real time with no problem. As long as what you see is in blue color, that is cached properly. Okay, so that is the most important thing to understand over here. Now, we're going to do a quick experiment to show you a bit what would happen if I did any sort of adjustment to this clip. So if I go here to the motion palette, which I'm already there, and here on the spatial noise reduction, right, on our denoise clip, the moment I change the luma, say to something like 41, now it's going to recache it. And you see now it's in red. It's going to take a few seconds to recache everything. Why is that happening? Because every time you make, every change you make to a specific node, okay, that has the cache mode application on, it's going to every time re-render a new cache for it, okay? So it's going to redo it. Whether it doesn't matter if it's by 1, if it's by 2, by 10, it's going to do it every single time. Now you can see it's blue again. We can play it again in real time. That's something very important to understand over there. It's every time you make a change, that is going to happen. Now, what would happen though if we did add another node over here? So we're going to press Option S to add a new node, and we're going to rename this to black and white, okay? Just like that. And now let's make this clip black and white and see what would happen. All right, so I am going to go here on our color palette, color wheels here on our primaries, and we are going to drop our saturation all the way down to 0. Now you can see that the clip turns in black and white, okay, as it should be, because we lowered that saturation, and this is our last node, the black and white node. But you can see that nothing is really happening to the black and white. Why is that? Well, as I explained earlier, the standard correction tools inside of Resolve, all right, are not processing intensive enough for us to need to be cached. Okay, so it's only for effects they're very powerful. Something like denoise, it's very, very powerful on your computer, on your machine. So that is why that is happening. Okay, and if you now take this node over here, the denoise, okay, because right now we have our RGB signal going into the input on our denoise input, all right? So that is the first thing that sees, all right? It's our denoise, and then we have a normal sunrise black and white. What would happen if we move this now to the end? Let's see. So we're gonna press E, all right? We move this and we just drop it in here, okay? We drop it in here once again. Now, what's going to happen, this is going to cache again. Why? Because we did change its position, right? So needs to reprocess it once again, because now we have a different processing going on, also because we did change the position of our node. So things look a little bit different by moving the denoise, okay, to the end, as we explained earlier. And see that now it's loading and recaches everything, all right? Now, what would happen if I did make any adjustment to the black and white? Remember, earlier we spoke about this. Every adjustment we make, we use the color corrector tools. Nothing changed because it's not intensive enough, right, to make any real difference. So let's see if here on the black and white node over here, I did anything to say our contrast, okay? So I drag this up to something like that. What happens? Now the denoise is caching again. Why is that happening? Because we did say that the the standard color correction tools are not going to really need to be cached, so nothing's going to happen. Well, that is happening now because all these nodes now are placed prior to our denoise. Okay, so our input signal, the denoise's input, comes from the black and white's output. So this outputs it into the denoise. So any change now we make to the black and white node, it's also going to affect the next node. So in this case being our denoise, as you can see over here. So now I can also reset that if I wanted to, or take it back to 1. And you can see the moment I do that, okay, it's going to do it again. So every time you make an adjustment now to your black and white, it's going to also, all right, adjust our denoise and recache it, not adjust it, I should say recache it. So that is a bit to understand how it works on a node level. Now let's look at a different case, okay? Because so far we have covered 2 of them, 2 levels, but let's see what happens on a sequence level in this case, okay? So we're gonna move back into over here into our edit page. You can see these are all of our clips, obviously, over here. And what we're going to do, you see our first clip now, it's black and white because we just did that. We are going to add another effect. So we're going to go here on effects, and we are going into our titles, okay? And under text, we are going to take that and put it on V2 over here. And we're going to drag this V2 now across the first 5 clips to something like that. I'm gonna close this to make it a little bit bigger. Okay, and you can see that now I can click here, I can go here on the inspector, okay, and on basic title, we can change this to the long work day, okay, work day, just like that. All right, and now what is happening here in the line above over here, you can see that now we are caching that title that we placed above all of our clips over here, all right? So this, in this case, being these first 5 clips, is caching that. And every time then you make a change to the title, whether you do anything to it, you resize it or anything like that, it's going to now has to re-render or recache, I should say, the entire thing. Perfect. So now, if we go back to our color page over here, now you can see that the V2 is also active right above it because obviously we added a new layer into V2. In case we want to deactivate then that V2, we can also do that here by clicking here on the V2, and now we're not caching that anymore. As you can see, that disappears now. In case you're working on your clips and you don't want to cache all of that stuff, all right? You think that it's not what I want right now. So you can just go here, you can either activate it, okay, which would recache it once again, or deactivate the V2 directly from here. So what I'm saying is that you don't necessarily need to go back and do it here because everything in Resolve is connected. Perfect. So now let's look at using other cache modes as well, because this is the smart cache, okay? Is this the only option that we have available to us? So we can go here into our playback once again, and into our render cache, we have the user. Okay, so now user, this allows us to make our own manual decisions with this, okay? Rather than, basically what this is telling you, okay, this is how you have to think about it. Once you add render cache smart, you're telling Resolve, you do it for me, okay? I trust you, I believe in you, so you're on it, right? And then Resolve is gonna just, okay, cache what deems necessary. Very processing intensive effects, etc. Now, when you go on user, now what you're telling Resolve here is, Resolve, I got this. I am going to tell you what I want you to cache for me, okay? So now we're gonna place here on user rather than the other one that we had, which was the smart. And now once we do this, what's going to happen, even if I come here on clip number 1, you can see that the blue over here has disappeared. Remember, we had on our denoise, we had the blue was already cached, and that was great. But now what's happening is that nothing is going to cache until you tell it so. Okay, so you have to tell which one of the nodes or entire node tree, just I'm going to show you in just a second, you want to cache. So in this case, say we want to recache our denoise that we had earlier. How do I do that? It's very simple. All you have to do over here is right click, and you can see that we have a few different options over here, all of these ones, okay? And the one that we care about over here is node cache, okay? And now it's an auto, but that's not what we want. We want to activate on because we are on user. We want to tell it what we want to cache. So once I say on, now you can see that we have actively now cached our denoise. So now some colorists prefer this because it gives you the flexibility of you deciding what you want to cache. Maybe you don't want to cache everything. It's not necessary for your workflow, you know? So it's really up to the now colorists to say what I want to cache, right? Rather than doing everything. Okay, so that is very, very useful right there. So now we are going to also look at how do we cache though an entire node tree rather than caching by a node, all right? So we're gonna go here on clip number 5, okay? And you can see that now we are going to clip onto node number 5. We're not gonna come here into our nodes. And by right clicking here, we have a few different options, all right? You can see all of these options right here. But the one that we care about, okay? You can see that we have 2 options over here. We have render cache, fusion output, which was what we were talking in earlier in the beginning. And we also have render cache, color output. Okay, so now we are going to choose the render cache color output. That is going to cache all of the nodes in your node tree, not just a single one. So render cache color output. Once I do that, you can see that now we're able, okay, to cache the entirety into all of our nodes into our node tree over here. Now, what is the advantage or disadvantage of this? Well, the advantage is that now you can run smoother, okay, because you're rendering the entire node tree rather than specific nodes. But the disadvantage obviously is that the file size, okay? So you are going to have much bigger file size. Remember that when you're caching things out, all of these are stored, whether you're using a hard drive, whether it's in your computer or machine, they're stored. So file size also matters in that sense. Well, if it matters to you extensively, then it's not a good idea to, to cache everything at a higher quality. So it's really up to your workflow, really. But there's something to be aware of, okay? So perfect. With that now done, what would happen if here on our clip number 5, okay, we now added a new node into right after this one, I'm going to press Shift S, okay, and we are going to add here a magenta look, okay, something like that. Here you go, so you can see better. All right, and we added our offset, okay, we changed it to something like magenta. What would happen, as we talked about it earlier, right? When you're caching, Resolve is deeming necessary only very processing intensive operations. But as we said, the standard corrector tools are not intensive. So what would happen if I change the offset over here? Let's see. If I click that and I make it, okay, that's very dark, but you could see now what is going on here. You could see that now, all right, we are caching once again the magenta look as well. Why is that happening? That is happening because when you're here on your user over here, as you can see, okay, and then you have that activated as your render cache color output, you are basically rendering the entire node tree. It doesn't matter if it's a processor intensive operation or if it's just a standard corrector tool. You're basically, every time you make a change in either one of the nodes, it's going to recache everything. Okay, so that is something to be aware. So that is a bit about that. Now, something that we can also do, in case you're wondering, what about the quality of things, or it's going still too slow, or the files are getting too big, can we adjust that? Yes, you have the option to adjust it, okay? And there's something to also be aware of. So what we're going to do right now is to see how can we configure the cache quality. So here on your project settings, we are onto our master settings over here. And if we drag down, you can see that we have this optimized media and render cache, okay? Which we can make a few different adjustments to our proxies, as you could see over here. But if you go down here, you also have the render cache format, okay? So by going here to your render cache format, you're able to change the actual format of your cache. So if you wanted to something entirely different, okay? Something uncompressed 10-bit, right? Or ProRes 444 HDR, okay? So you have all of these, ProRes 422. So you can choose your render cache format, okay? You can also have the option to enable background caching after 5 seconds, right? So that is really up to you, how you like to work. You also have this nifty option over here to automatically cache transitions in user mode, okay? And automatically cache composites in user mode, which will effectively basically turn your user mode very similarly to how the smart mode works, because it would automatically now cache both transitions and composites. Okay, and then you can also here on your working folders select which folders do you want to work off of. So that is something that you could do. Once again, you can change the render cache format if you want something of higher quality, higher fidelity, okay? Because say you're working in your color page and obviously you want high fidelity for your qualifiers and all your selections. So you want to make sure that the quality is paramount to you. So in that case, you can go to a render cache format that's much higher, okay? You choose a codec that is appropriate for the work that you're doing. So that is something that you could do right over here, okay? Just so that you're aware. Perfect. So now, finally, how do we clear a cache, okay? Because when you're caching, remember, you're storing all that data. All those cache renders, they're stored somewhere, right? And they can accumulate very, very fast. Let me tell you, it can accumulate so fast that you can run out of space very quickly. So it's important, I would say it's mandatory for you to be aware that you can delete them, all right? So if you have unused, okay, cache renders that from an older project that is done, or things that, remember, you're not deleting any clip, only these cache renders, okay? So it's not the end of the world if you delete them. So how do we delete them? You can go up here on playback and onto render cache, right? We had our options to none, smart or user, okay? I don't like the names smart or user. I would like if it was better here, auto and manual, because that's basically what it means, auto and manual. But that is a naming convention over there. Underneath here, you have the delete render cache, okay? And now you can delete the render cache as you want to. If you want all, so that would delete all of the render caches in this project. You could do unused, okay? So render caches, they're unused and they're stored in your memory, okay? So you don't really want them. And then by selected clips, so the clips that you select. You can also manage here cache data. In this case, what we're going to do over here, we are going to choose the unused ones. So we're going to click here on unused, delete unused cache. This will delete all the unused render cache in this project. You can't undo this action, delete, okay? Because we're sure of it. Now, what would happen if you go here on playback and somehow this happens? Render, delete render cache, and you say all, okay? And then you click delete. Okay, it's not the end of the world because now look what happens. You are basically recaching everything. So there's something that for you to be aware, okay? So you can basically, if that happens, you know, just wait, it restarts and the problem should be solved, okay? That is a bit about that. Now, sometimes can happen, and this has happened to me before, where you come across some mistakes or some errors where you cache your clips and then it says media offline, but you know for sure that the media is linked and everything is connected, but that can happen. Well, the way to fix that, if that has ever happened to you or will happen to you, is just go and playback over here and then delete the render cache, delete all of them, and then let it reload. And once, you know, you start re-rendering all those different caches for all those different clips, the problem should be solved. Don't freak out in case that happens, because that is an error that has happened to me also. You can just delete them and then wait for a cache to go back, and then the problem should be solved, okay? And as I said, if you think that files are getting too big and you saved everything on your machine, remember that you can go back to those options and then choose the working folders, all right? So if you want to do it or add it into your hard drive, that probably would be optimal, you know, if you have a huge project that you're working on. So that is it for this lesson, okay? So that was lesson number 8, and we're going to go into lesson number 9 next, which we're going to talk in more detail about how do we work with raw files, okay, inside of Resolve. Perfect. So now, once again, if you like this video, please feel free to leave a comment, like, subscribe. That helps the channel. And I thank you all for being a part of this, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.